So before we start on the basics of building an HTML page, there are 4 things I want to explain. Number 1, get a good text editor. Number 2, download the zip file of the lesson. Number 3, learn to refresh a browser page. And 4, learn to view source in a browser. So let's go over those 4 points one at a time. So first, get a good text editing program. Now, I suggest using Notepad++ if you're using Windows, and I suggest using JEdit if you're on Apple Mac OS. I provided links to both of those programs down below and in the article at the bottom of the article. And here are a few other options. So for Windows, you can have Notepad++, Notepad Lite, mEditor, TextPad, or Notepad. Now, Notepad comes with Windows, but it doesn't have any syntax highlighting. And I'll explain that in just a moment. So for an Apple computer, you can use JEdit, Text Wrangler, BBEdit, TextMate, or TextEdit. Again, that comes with the operating system, but it doesn't have syntax highlighting. So this right here is an example of syntax highlighting. So I don't expect you to understand what the code is that you're looking at, but look at the code on the left and look at the code on the right. As you can tell, the code on the left, even though you don't really understand what it's doing, it's kind of easy visually to see different sections of the code. Whereas the code on the right-hand side that has no syntax highlighting, that's really difficult to read. So this is why I recommend when you're programming, you should always use a text editor which features syntax highlighting. It looks far more confusing without the colorized code, doesn't it? So this is why I suggest you use a program offering syntax highlighting. It simply makes it easier to identify and isolate the blocks of code you're working with. So make sure you're using a text editor and do not use a word processor. Why? Because word processing programs, for example, Microsoft Word or Apache OpenOffice, will often monkey around with your code and change it when you save the file. Since you want complete control over the code you're writing, I cannot suggest you use any word processing programs. Now, there's some specialized web building applications and programs which tie the visuals of the browser into a text editor feature. These are called WYSIWYG programs. WYSIWYG, W-Y-S-Y, whatever it is, is an anagram for what you see is what you get. They're very popular, and they're really trendy for a while. I don't recommend using any WYSIWYG software either. Why? Well, you may think it's a good idea to build a page the way that you want it visually, and then study the code written for it. I mean, that could be a fantastic way to learn. And yeah, it sounds like a great theory on paper, but unfortunately, WYSIWYG programs don't really allow you to do that, because WYSIWYG programs are notorious for writing horrible code. They're clunky and inefficient and create very complicated and bloated files, even for the most simplistic of web pages. So, to learn this the proper way, stick with a text editor and a browser. Next, download the zip file of the lesson. So, at the bottom of every single article that I have written about all of these skills, you'll see another download link called zip file of lesson code. So please download that file before we begin and open it on your computer. When you double click and run the zip file, it should automatically create a folder containing all the files we will use in this lesson. Learn to refresh your browser. So for these lessons, you're going to need 2 programs running simultaneously. You'll want to open the HTML files in your syntax highlighting text editor and your favorite web browser, at the same time. You want the HTML file open in both, so you can alter the file in the text editor, then save it, refresh your browser, and see your changes instantly. Anytime you change the code in the text editor, you'll hit Control S to save the page, then switch to your browser and refresh the page to see your changes. In order to refresh your page in a browser, there are two options. Number one, you can hit the F5 key at the very top of your keyboard. And number two, you can click the refresh button near the URL field. The refresh button is typically a spiral arrow or double arrow indicating a reload of the page. Here are some examples of what the refresh button looks like in various browsers. Learn to view source in your browser. So for these lessons, you'll often want to view the source code inside your browser. In most, you can do this by right-clicking on the page and selecting View Source, or View Page Source, or something similar. Alternatively, you can use the Control-U keyboard shortcut, and this will pop up a new browser window displaying the HTML code for that page. So let's get started. Finally, we can begin to program an HTML page. So first, let's make the most simplistic page that we can with a comment on it. So once you download the zip file from the website, you should have all of these files that you see right here. So on the very first lesson, we need to open up this file for lesson A in both a web browser and a text editor. So if we double click, it's going to open up in the browser, and you can see this is all you need to create a basic web page. And then if we come back, and we could open this a number of different ways. We could right click on it and say edit with Notepad++, and there we go. Now it's opened up in Notepad, and it is also opened in the browser. So as you can see, basic HTML is truly very basic. You have a starting HTML tag, and you have a closing HTML tag. And these tags have the greater than, less than symbols on either side, and then you can see the closing one has a slash before repeating the same text that is in whatever the opening tag is. This section right here is called a comment, and it doesn't display on the web page, but it is a way to comment the code, to put in little notes on the code, and that way you can kind of remind yourself and you can help other developers and let them know what's going on in this part of the web page. And that's really all there is to it. So again, if we come back into the browser, you can see that the comment does not appear, but that text, this is all you need to create a web page, that shows up. Next, let's go over some basic functionality of HTML tags. What are tags? I will explain those in the next lesson. Keep on watching, buckaroo. When you open up lesson B in the web browser, you can see right here that this sentence is written outside the comment tag. It should appear immediately after the first sentence, even though there's a lot of stuff on this page when you view the source code. So remember, viewing the source code is as simple as right-clicking on the page and going here to View Page Source. And there you go. It shows you everything in the source code of this page. Now, remember, you can't edit this stuff. You can't type on this. Okay, this is just displaying things because you're still inside the web browser. You can see all it did is open up a second tab in your browser. If you want to edit this page, you need to come back in here into a text editor, which is, again, the exact same text because it is the exact same file, but this you're just looking at it, and in the editor you can change it. So let's say if we want to add here, this is all you need to create a basic web page. So there, and then I save it, and then I come back into my browser, and if I refresh the page, you'll see the text so there now appears. And same thing if I go into the source code and refresh, now the text that I added appears on the page. You may have noticed something very important is missing. All web pages should have a title in the title bar of the browser. So far, the two example pages that I have shown have not had titles. So let's show how to add titles in the next lesson. For lesson C, we're going to move on to the titles tag. Now, this is important because the title tag actually puts the title of your web page in the tab of the browser, okay? So, for example, let's look at one of the previous pages, right? For the lesson on tags, you can see that the tab shows the name of the file, right? But for lesson C, you see it says HTML for non-programmers. So let's open up that file in the text editor, and we can see now we have some new tags that are in the HTML file. So the basic tags are just HTML and close HTML, and then the body tags tell the browser where the main content is going to be. So now we've added this, a head tag. And the head is exactly what it sounds like. It's the header of a page. And a lot of different elements can go inside of the head tag, but for now we're just going to start with title. So the title tag is what makes the text appear in the tab of the browser. And that's an extremely important thing to remember when you get into further lessons and other articles that I'll talk about when we get into things like optimizing your website to show up in a search engine. So these last few videos have gotten a little bit cluttered, even though we're only on the fourth lesson here. Let's show you what this looks like without all the comments in it. So here, as you can see, it's a lot more simplistic, right? We have the HTML, we have the head, the title tag inside there, and it's a lot easier to read that way. And if we come back into the text editor, again, without all the comments, it's a lot simpler to kind of see what's going on. So you can see the head tag, which is nested inside of the HTML tag, and then the title tag, which is nested inside of that. Next, let's quickly talk about paragraphs and line breaks. So here in the browser, you can see this sentence where it says, note that even when you place line breaks in your source code, you will not see a line break on the web page. So if we come into the source code here, this is that sentence. And as you can see, there are a bunch of line breaks, but it doesn't show up that way on the page. Now, exactly the opposite is true when we start using our line break tags. So this BR is a line break, and a P tag is a paragraph break. The difference is that the paragraph will actually put an extra line space in between the text. So right here, the line break tag simply jumps your text down onto the next line, and you see I have these BRs between all the words, right? Now let's go back into the browser, and you can see that section right here. So the BRs are just line breaks onto the next line. And then I say, so you must only use a double line break tag to get the same effect. So if we come back here, here's that sentence. You must only use double line breaks. So if you put in 2 line breaks, it kind of looks just like a paragraph tag. So right here we say we want our code to be fast and efficient, and then so to review. So let's come back in here, and you see we want our code to be fast and efficient, and so to review. So right here I used a paragraph tag. You can see right there is the paragraph tag, and the paragraph tag puts in a space automatically. Line breaks are just a line, and then 2 line breaks act like a paragraph tag. Okay, make sense? All right, good. All right, so next we're going to talk about images and links. All right, so images actually do not have a closing tag, right? They're kind of just like the BR tag and just like the paragraph tag. And if we come in here and look at the source code, right here is where the image appears. So you'll notice that there is a file path to the JPEG, okay? So it's saying that the image source is in images/Sunset Palm. So if we come back into our folder structure, we can see that there is an images folder and inside here is that Sunset Palm JPEG. So it's simply following the path in this folder structure. So that's how it's telling it where the image appears. Now for text links, there is a closing tag. Okay, so this right here is a link tag, and it's just the letter A, and then this element in the link tag is just href, and then here it gives the path to that file. And then when we want the link to stop, we put in the closing tag right there. It's just a close A. So let's go back to the web page and see how all that pans out. So here's the image, and here are the links. So if I click this link, it's going to go to the next page in the lesson, which is this right here, and then I can click the back button and go back to where I was. And then the other thing that you can do is right here, it talks about targeting. So you can add this extra element called target, and if you do target underscore top, it links in the same window, and if you do target underscore blank, it links into a new window. So let's again come back in here, and we'll see I spelled that out in the text. So if I click this one, we're in the same window. So we click the back button. Now when I click this link, it'll go to the same page, but it's going to be in a new tab. You can see right there. So now you know how images work, and you know how links work, and you can actually combine them as well. So this image actually has a link. So if I click that, again, it goes to the same page. And the way that we do that is simply by nesting the tags. So you can see all of that code right here. So here is the tag for the image, and then on either side of that, there is the open and close link tag. Now we'll look at a few different ways that you can format text. So, for example, if we go into the web browser, we can see here we have italics, we have bold, and then here we have bold and italics. So let's look at the source code and see how all that is done. So italics are done with this, just an I tag, and there is an open and there is a close I tag. And then bold is just the letter B, and there is also an open and close for bold. Alternatively, you can also do bold with this. You can use a strong tag, and that does the same thing as the B tag. And then for italics, you can use this. This is an M tag, and again, it has an open and a close. And then you can also nest these tags inside of each other. So for example, this is how you do bold and italic. And you need to make sure that when you're nesting tags that you close the tags in the reverse order that you opened them, okay? So you can see it's BI and then IB, right? So your last tag that you opened was the I, so that means the first tag you close is the I. Pretty simple when you've got two tags, but it can get really confusing. It can get kind of complicated if you start nesting a lot of stuff, but that is the basics of how you should always do that. You can also customize the color of text. So this section right here is doing exactly that. And if we come back into the browser, we can see that in this part. So it says fonts can be colored any color you want in red, and then this section is in blue, right? So let's come back in here and look at that. So here we have a span tag. Now span tags are basically kind of a placeholder tag. They don't really do anything to the page until you start to apply some kind of elements to it. So in this case, I'm using the style element, and I'm calling a color, and then this is a hexadecimal color to say what color I want the font to be. Hexadecimal colors, it's just like a weird code that's used by the computer to indicate different colors. You don't have to like memorize these or anything, you just look them up when you need them. So this happens to be red, and this hexadecimal color happens to be blue. And as you can see here, there is a close tag for the span. And this span tag has its close right there. Okay, so that is the basics of how you color the fonts. And then if we come down here, we can see that you can actually color the entire page as well using a similar technique, right? So here's a link. Click here to see an example to background color. And if we click on this, we can see a page that has a horrible green color. And if we come into all of our files and we open up that page in a text editor, we can see that within the body there is a style tag calling a background hexadecimal color. So that style element doesn't have to just be applied to a span tag. You see, it can also apply to a body tag. So that's just a few different ways that you can do colors. Now again, there are many different ways to accomplish the same thing, okay? So let's say, for example, I showed you all this. I showed you how to use bold and strong, and I showed you how to use italic tags, but you could also use an inline style, or you could use font tags to do the exact same thing. So let's look at the code for that, and you can see here is the span, and I'm calling the color, which I went over earlier, but I'm also threw in this. Font weight is bold, and then here I have font style as italic, and I'm switching the font weight back to normal. So that is how I have this. I have bold in blue, and I have italic in blue. And then right here, there's another way you can do it. This is a font tag. So you can see the span tag uses a style, and the font tag uses color, but it's still calling the same colors. So it's, again, just different ways to do it. And the font tag has an open here, and it has a close down here. So there are a lot of different ways you can achieve the same results. And then this is called a horizontal rule, the HR tag. It's not really used that much anymore, but you can see I put in a bunch of them here, that straight line and this straight line, this one. All these lines shooting across the page, those are done with HR tags. Believe me, I realize I know that I'm moving really, really fast through all this stuff. I don't expect you to keep up with me, right? I'm just kind of going over this to give you a general overview in the hopes that you'll go back and study the code yourself and play around with it and things like that. So I know I'm moving really quickly. I don't expect you to keep up with me. I just want you to kind of get a feel for what's happening here. So the next thing we'll talk about is headline tags. And then I'll also show you how you can achieve a similar look to headline tags by using these inline styles. So let's go back here to the source code, and you can see headline tags are very simple. They're just H1, H2, H3, H4, and they get progressively smaller, okay? And if we come down here, we can see I created a bunch of spans, and I call a font size, and I make all the fonts bold. So visually on the page, it looks pretty much identical to all of the headline tags, okay? I mean, why would you do this? Well, you really wouldn't. Like I said, I just want you to see that visually you can create the same kind of look through a few different methods, okay? And then the next thing I'd like to show you is ordered lists and unordered lists. So this right here is an example of an ordered list, and this one is an unordered list. You'll notice that both of them have LI tags, which stand for line item. And then the ordered list is an OL with a closing tag, and the unordered is a UL with a closing tag. And what's the difference? Well, those are right down here. So an ordered list automatically puts a number in front of every line item, and an unordered list automatically puts a bullet in front of every single line item. So that's the difference. You'll notice that here there are no numbers in the source code. There are just LIs. But if you look at the browser, you see a bunch of numbers. And same thing with the bullets, right? There are no bullets in the unordered list. There are just LIs. but the browser knows to render the numbers and the bullets based on if it's an OL or a UL. For the final aspect of text formatting, I'll show you how to use different fonts. And once again, there are two different ways that you can do it. So right here, we can see a bunch of fonts that are changed using a font tag. And here you can see the exact same fonts that are being changed with the font style. So if we come into the source code, we can see that right here. So here's the font tag. It has a face element, which is calling the name of a font. And again, there is a close tag for the font. Down here, we're using a span, and we're calling a style of the font family, which is the same thing as face. You can see Arial, Courier, Verdana, and Tahoma, and we got the exact same fonts down here. And when you view them in the browser, again, they look exactly the same. They're just being called in different ways in the source code. But again, font tags aren't really used anymore. They're kind of outdated, and you're really just going to use styles. But for the purposes of teaching the basics, I want to make sure that you understand all these alternative ways of achieving the same thing. The final thing to show you when it comes to basic HTML is how to create tables. Now, tables are a thing that are really kind of, again, outdated. They don't get used that much anymore, but they are still used actually on some very large websites, because sometimes building a grid pattern to show information is the best, most efficient way to do it. So here we can see a whole bunch of different examples of tables. Tables consist of a few different elements called rows and columns, and then within those rows and columns are different cells. Okay, so we can see right here this text spans 3 columns, this text spans 3 rows, and then each of these individual spaces, those are all called cells. So how do you create a table? Well, this right here, this first one, that's the most simplistic table there is. So let's look at the source code for that, and you can see that right here. So what is happening with all of this? Well, border equals 1 is turning on the outline around the table. It's creating the border. The table has an open and close tag, and there is a row. TR stands for table row. There is an opening row, a closing row, and then TD stands for table data, and that is an individual cell inside of the table. So as you can see here with tables, this is when HTML tags start to get nested inside of one another, and it starts to get a little bit complicated. So you need to really pay attention when you're building out things like this. Now here is another table, exactly the same, very simple, except the border is a little bit larger. So if we come back here, we can see here is the larger border, and that's what it looks like in the browser. Now here is a table with 2 columns. So if we come back to the source code, we can see that right here. Okay, so there's only 1 row, there's a table row, but then there are 2 table data cells creating 2 columns. Here we have a table with 2 rows, and we can see that right here. So you can see that there's a table row that gets started and closed, and then here's the next table row that gets opened and closed. And then this table, that starts to get pretty complicated. That is this one right here. So we see there is a table with 2 columns, but inside this second cell is another table with 2 rows. And so that's what we have going on right here. So here is the outside kind of parent table, and here is that child table that is nested inside. So things can start to get pretty sophisticated. And then here you can also span columns and rows. So let's show you what that looks like. That code is call span, obviously to span a column, and then row span to span rows. So this table right here, this text spans 3 columns with A, B, and C. That is represented by this table. And then this text spans 3 rows, 1, 2, and 3. That is represented by this table. So it gets a little confusing. It does take you a while to sort of get used to this stuff, but that's some of the basics of nesting tables and spanning rows and columns. Now you can also turn off the borders. So as you can see right here, this table just numbers 1 to 15, and then here is the exact same thing, but there's no borders on it. And all you got to do with that is, if we come down here, we can see this is the first table where the border equals 1, and on the second table, the border equals 0. And finally, let's take a look at cell spacing and cell padding. So in this table, both are set to 0, and you can see how close the border is to the text. Then in this table, the spacing is set to 10 and the padding is set to 0, and you can see that there's this really thick kind of wide spacing around the table. And then this is exactly the opposite. The spacing is set to 0 and the padding is set to 10. So again, we have a very thin border, but there's a big gap between the text. So let's take a look at that in the source code, and we can see that right here. So this table has the spacing and the padding at 0. This has spacing at 10, padding at 0, and this one is exactly the opposite. So those 3 tables right here, here, and here are these 3 tables on the page. And then finally we can look at the width. So this table has a width of 100%. This one has a width of 50%. And again, we come in here and we can see the width percentage on that table and on that table. And what that means is that it's going to go across 100% of the browser window, and this one is going to go across 50% of the browser window. So if we shrink down the browser and we just change the size here by dragging back and forth, you'll notice that the 100% table is always all the way to the right-hand side of the browser window, and the 50% table is only halfway across the browser window, no matter what size we make the window. So that's what the width percentages will do for you. Congratulations! You made it through the first step of the process. Those are the basics of HTML and simple web pages. Now, there are a lot more HTML tags which I didn't cover, but again, the purpose of this course is to teach the basics. This is not intended to make you an expert. I just want to share the fundamentals and let you start to learn and expand your knowledge from there. My philosophy of code has always been that old KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Build all your websites using HTML, period. If HTML is incapable of accomplishing what you need, add the next most complicated technology. Will it be easier to build using CSS? Then add some CSS. Do you need things that can only be done with JavaScript? Then add some JavaScript. Does your website have to use PHP in a database? Fine, then add that. But don't ever use technology that is overly complicated or unnecessary. KISS. Keep it simple. Stupid. Always use what is the most simplistic technology for the task at hand. Okay? And one more thing. Tron fights for the users. Remember, the guest, the users, are the most important thing. We build websites for the users. Computer nerds don't, okay? Computer nerds like to show off their knowledge of the latest and greatest technology. You know, they think it's cool to waste away their weekend learning the hip and trendy new framework or library or building out a new server technology. No, that's not cool. That's a pathetic waste of time. Get a life, you nerds. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying a person shouldn't learn new technology. Obviously, I wouldn't be building an educational website teaching technology if I didn't think people should learn it. I'm simply saying, don't learn technology because you think it's neat or cool. Learn technology that will benefit the users. because users don't care about the technology you have learned. Users don't care if a website is built with HTML or XHTML. Users don't care if a site uses CSS or PHP or jQuery libraries or the latest frameworks. Users just want a website that works and provides the information they need in a timely manner. Does the website crash? Does it take forever to load? Is it easy to navigate? Can they find what they're looking for? Can they save the page? Can they print it out? Can they bookmark it to reference later? Those are the issues and features that users care about. So make sure you're building websites which allow users to do those things. Respect the needs of the users, first and foremost. This isn't about you. This isn't about your ego. This isn't about your skills or your knowledge. This isn't about impressing your coworkers and peers. Only computer nerds care about that irrelevant popularity contest. Computer nerds are jerks because computer nerds only care about what they think is cool. Computer nerds don't care about users or the needs of users. So don't be a computer nerd. Care about the users above all else. Respect the users. The users are what matter. Your own ego is not relevant. Unless you're a socially inept computer nerd who puts your own arrogance above the needs of those you are supposedly trying to help. Remember, kids, the world owes you nothing until you create things of value.